Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I have a coworker named Paul who was in the Navy back in the 1970s. He was stationed on the USS Shreveport. We got to talking one day about the perils of being at sea and how, in some instances, the weather can be the least of your concerns. Paul explained that while being stationed on the transport ship, the crew used to be paid in cash every other week. I found that kind of strange, seeing as they couldn't exactly go anywhere to spend their money, and food was provided anyway. He told me, though, that the sailors would predominantly use their earnings to gamble, and playing cards was the usual method. There were a few individuals on board who acted as loan sharks of sorts during the week. In between payments, they would loan out cash with high interest rates. Paul worked as a cook in the mess hall. He was acquainted with another man in his division. We'll call this man Jack. Jack was constantly behind on his debts to the loan sharks. Keep in mind, there was no place on board the ship where the loan sharking sailors couldn't find you either. It's not as though you could seek help from the officers. Jack finally fell so deep into debt he was never going to be able to repay what he owed. Once back on land, the debts were nullified, but the men he owed money to weren't about to let his balance go unforgiven. Every day aboard the ship, the crew would be lined up for roll call. One morning, Jack wasn't in his designated spot. He would never stand there again. The entire ship was searched, but no trace of him was ever found. It's only speculation, but Paul believes that Jack met a grisly end and was thrown overboard. After all, what better place to dispose of a body than over the side of a Navy vessel at night? An investigation was conducted. The entire crew was questioned, but no proof of foul play was ever uncovered. It was concluded that one way or another, he had ended up in the water that night, and it was ruled an accident. The problem with that, though, is that aboard every ship, regardless of the weather or time of day, there's a watchman stationed at the stern, keeping an eye on things and watching for anybody who's fallen overboard. Specifically for such a poor soul in the water, that vigilant sailor is their one and only chance for rescue. If they fail to spot you, you're as good as dead. It's entirely possible the watchman did not see Jack as he floundered in the waves, but the far more likely scenario is that he was already bound and unconscious or dead before even hitting the water. Kinda makes you wonder how many countless bodies have been tossed overboard, claimed by the sea, and been forgotten by history. When I was 12, my family lived in an isolated house deep in the woods. I remember it was December, just before Christmas, and we were gathered around the Christmas tree in the living room watching TV. Maybe around 10 o'clock or so, I decided to go to bed. My bedroom was on the ground floor, while everyone else's was upstairs. I remember I fell asleep without much trouble, but later on that night, I awoke, seemingly for no reason at all. I rolled over to face the window that sat next to my bed. The side of the house where my window faced was pressed right up against the trees. For anyone to look inside, they would have to walk through the undergrowth and duck under some branches just to come close enough to it. That was the reason I didn't have any curtains. I figured there was no point to having them in the first place. When I woke up, though, a terrible, vulnerable feeling washed over me. Then a feeling I had never experienced before came to the front of my mind. Next to that window, it felt as if I was being watched. There was no light on in my room, but likewise, there was nothing illuminating outside my window either. I stared at the window for a few moments, then I sat up. I thought I was just imagining things, but just as I was about to lay back down, I saw the shuffling of movement outside. I sat bolt upright, but I didn't hear anything else. After another moment, I laid back down. Even though I felt uneasy, I started to drift back off to sleep unwillingly. A short time later, I don't know exactly how long, I woke up again. This time, though, it was because I was suddenly freezing cold. I shivered all over and climbed out of bed. I suppose I had already forgotten about the feeling I had earlier. I left my room and walked down the hallway without turning on any of the lights. I entered the kitchen. As I made the turn into the breakfast area, I felt a freezing cold breeze on my face. That's when I literally froze in my tracks. The back door was wide open, and snow was collecting just inside on the floor. I could make out in the snow the faint outline of tracks leading inside, but none walking away. There was a ringing sensation in my ears, and for a few moments, I found myself completely unable to move. Even to turn around was a monumental effort. That's when I heard the slow, quiet turning of the door handle to my right, which led into the laundry room. I don't know exactly why I decided to do this, but I ran to the gun closet instead of upstairs to my parents' room. That was the first thought in my head. I had to get the gun and defend myself. I took the hunting rifle out and raised it just as my parents had taught me. The gun was not loaded, but I figured the rifle alone would be enough to scare off an intruder. I could now see a dark figure peeking around the entranceway to the kitchen. I couldn't make out any details, only that it was clearly an adult. I'm not sure how well the figure could see me, but I stammered out that I had a gun. What the figure said next I can remember clearly, even to this day. In a happy sing-song voice, the person clearly spoke my first name, then added, "I'm not going to hurt you. I would never hurt you." I didn't recognize the voice at all. I had no idea who this could be, but clearly, they knew me. I screamed like I was on fire. I sprinted back to my room and locked the door. I hurled myself under the bed. I could hear the man calling out my name as he followed me down the hallway. He made his way to the outside of my bedroom door. That's when I heard my father scream from the top of the stairs. I heard the intruder bolt back down the hall and out the door into the snowy night. It took a while for me to calm down enough to go and unlock the door for my parents. For a while, they pretended not to know who this was, but a few years later, when I was older, my dad admitted to me that the man was a former friend of his. He had taken a special interest in me. He had repeatedly asked my father if he could take me out to go shopping or for ice cream. Whenever my father refused, he started stalking me around our own property. I never had a clue about any of this. My parents called the police and pressed charges, but if the man was ever caught, I never heard about it. I did ask my parents about him every once in a while, but they would always just say, "It's over. Don't worry." When I was 17, I was living in one of those small towns without the community feel. It was a toxic place, rampant with drug addiction and lots of crime. I learned from a young age to always watch my back and to never go past dark in certain areas. This town held a lot of trauma for me, some even scarier than this incident I'm about to share. I left the town a few short months after this happened, and I would never think of moving back at any point in my life. For context, I was working a lot and finishing up my senior year. We didn't have a working washer and dryer at home, so I had to go to the laundromat every time. We lived on the outskirts of town, so it took about 10 minutes to drive into it. We were so secluded out there. There were no street lights at all, and I lived on a street right in between two mountains. We were just down the street from this abandoned dairy farm. We had acres to ourselves. There was really nothing out there. It was so dark you could barely see 10 feet in front of you. There was only my street and the cross street to get to it, so you always knew when a car was coming. One afternoon, I found some time to take my laundry to the laundromat, and I took my mom and brother's laundry too, so my mom wouldn't have to go during her work week. This meant I had 3 times as much laundry and it would take much longer at the laundromat. Still, there was a Hastings next door, so I didn't worry too much, as long as I could leave before dark. This was not a very good area to be stuck in. By the time I left, the sun was just about to go down, so it pretty much worked out. But by the time I was on the cross street to get to my own street, it was completely pitch black. I was all alone out there. Or at least, I thought so. I turned onto my street, and within seconds, someone appeared behind me, so close they were almost touching my bumper. They had their brights on. This confused me. I had seen no other cars on the road or behind me before I turned. It was like their lights had been off until they were directly behind me. This gave me a pit in my stomach. I sped up, but they kept perfect pace with me, right behind. It was a winding, dark road. My headlights wouldn't illuminate much. I was starting to get very anxious. I made a split-second judgment call and drove right past my own driveway. I didn't feel right alerting some random person to where I lived with my mom and baby brother. Especially because cell reception barely existed in our area. The person behind me was still right on my bumper, even with me speeding up. I knew that up ahead there was a fork in the road. Going straight would lead to downtown. To the left, you'd enter a small residential area with just a few homes and a narrow road that only allowed one car at a time. At the last second, I turned left without using my blinker, hoping I could trick the car behind me into continuing straight. But they made a sharp turn and followed right behind me. At this point, I was extremely scared, but I still held on to a bit of hope that maybe they just lived nearby. Now we were going close to 50 down these residential streets, and the car was still not backing off. They stayed so close I couldn't even tell the make of the vehicle or whether it was a car or SUV. I couldn't see who was inside. I was afraid that if I slowed down, they'd bump into me or ram me off the road. Suddenly, I saw a house directly in front of me. The street ended at a 90-degree angle. I had to turn left immediately or risk crashing into the house. Luckily, my car made the turn. I turned onto the road that leads to downtown. The car was still behind me, proving they definitely didn't live in the area. At this point, I was certain they were following me. I made the decision to drive to the sheriff's office. By now, we were going 60 in a 25 miles per hour zone. I saw a street that would take me to the sheriff's office and made the turn so sharply that the car behind me couldn't quite make it and kept going straight. I drove around for a while, making random turns to make sure they couldn't find me again. Finally, I pulled over in the dark and cried. I was safe this time. But I went home terrified, and I changed the way I drive from that day forward. I moved to a more populated city and now live in a large apartment complex. I still drive past my old area sometimes. I always get a weird feeling someone will appear behind me. Anytime someone does pull in behind me, I drive right past my apartment and circle the complex until I'm sure they're not following me. My paranoia saved me that night, possibly saved my mom and baby brother too, from something that could have been so much worse. Always pay attention to the people behind you. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.